for Chapter 20, Political Realignments in the 1890s. The most important event of the 1890s was the Panic of 1893 and the four-year depression that followed it. One of the results of that painful period was a realignment of American politics. Politics of stalemate. Politics was still restricted to white males who seemed to enjoy it enormously and who turned out at the polls in great numbers. The party deadlock. The Democratic Party revived quickly after the Civil War and divided the electorate almost evenly with the Republicans. Usually, neither party controlled both Congress and the White House. The government in Washington became less important, and local and state governments became more important. Experiments in the state. State governments set up commissions to investigate and regulate railroads and factories. Illinois was especially active in this regards, and its activities were declared constitutional in the case of Munn versus Illinois in 1877. When the Supreme Court retreated later in the Wabash case 1886, Congress established the Interstate Commerce Commission. Reestablishing presidential power. The office of the president reached its lowest point under Andrew Johnson, but presidents who followed him in office reasserted the powers of the executive branch. Hayes ended military reconstruction. Garfield, in the short time before his assassination, began to assert his leadership of the party. Chester Arthur pushed for a strong navy and for civil service reform. Grover Cleveland used the veto to return the federal government to the democratic principle of laissez-faire. In the election of 1888, Cleveland won the popular vote but lost the presidency to President Benjamin Harrison, who won the Electoral College. Republicans empower the billion-dollar Congress. The election of 1888 gave the Republicans control of the White House and Capitol Hill and enabled them to enact their party's program. Tariffs, trusts, and silver. The Republicans, traditionally a high tariff party, passed the McKinley tariffs in 1890, raising duties to their highest point up to that time. As the party of the Union and the Union Army, the Republicans granted pensions to veterans or their survivors. By 1893, nearly 1 million pensions had been granted. The Republicans also passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. The act attempted to regulate big business without hurting it. In order to head off demands for free coinage of silver, which would have led to inflation, the Republicans passed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act in 1890 also. The federal government bought a certain amount of silver each month and issued paper money backed by silver, or by gold, if the holder preferred. The 1890 elections. On the state level, Republicans also asserted strong government policies such as Sunday closing laws, prohibition, and mandatory use of English in public schools. Although the Republicans were remarkably successful in enacting their programs into law, various blocks of voters were so alienated that the party suffered massive losses in the congressional election of 1890. The rise of the populist movement. Even before the elections of 1890 made the populists prominent, this new party, the National Farmers Alliance and Industrial Union, had been attracting unhappy farmers of the South and the West. The farm problem. In the last half of the 19th century, a worldwide agricultural economy emerged. But since there were great fluctuations in supply and demand, American farmers enjoyed prosperity one year and depression the next. In general, farmers complained about lower prices for their crops, rising railroad rates, and enormous mortgages. In reality, farmers' purchasing power generally increased, railroad rates declined, and mortgages allowed farmers to mechanize and thus improve their incomes. The economic conditions of farmers varied from region to region and from individual to individual. But there was general feeling of depression among farmers, who resented the snobbery of city folk and who saw their children leave the farms for life in the metropolis. The fast-growing Farmers Alliance. The National Farmers Alliance and Industrial Union succeeded the Grange and various other farmer associations. It began as the Southern Alliance in 1875, headed by Charles McCune, and spread rapidly. After 1889, it absorbed the Northwestern Alliance. In the South, the alliance had great success in capturing local Democratic parties, but in the North and the West, the alliance ran its own candidates successfully. At a meeting in Ocala, Florida, in 1890, the alliance announced its Ocala demands, which called for a system of government warehouses that would enable farmers to store their harvest while awaiting higher prices. The alliance also demanded the free coinage of silver, low tariffs, a federal income tax, direct elections of senators, and the regulation of railroads. The People's Party. The Southern Alliance gave up on the Democrats and agreed to the formation of the Populist Party. In the South, the Populists recruited African Americans and gave them influential positions. In the election of 1892, Populist nominee James Weaver drew over 1 million votes, although he failed to attract voters in urban areas, the South, and even the Midwest. The alliance itself began to lose members. The crisis of the Depression. The Democrats swept the election of 1890 and 1892 and controlled both the White House and Congress when the